Welcome to Living Outside the Box, a podcast associated with Outside the Box Consulting. I'm Ben Bowman, your host, and I am so glad to have you continue this journey with us as we look at outside the box leadership. And I'm excited, especially today, to have my friend Joy Griffin with us today. So, welcome, Joy.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm honored to be with you, brother. Thank you.
Glad to have you. So, Joy, before we get into the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is cultural intelligence, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and how we know each other.
Wow. Well, I am just a dairy farm girl from down in Georgia, the state of Georgia, and I'm so thankful for my upbringing. And met my husband, though, at Asbury Seminary. I'm very thankful for the things God did in my life to get me to that point. And then we have been together in ministry. For 40 years, we've been married, pastored, as well as we're missionaries when the Iron Curtain came down, when the Berlin Wall came down, in the Wesleyan world, some of the big church leaders knew that the little country of Estonia was a place where some believers had survived occupation. And so there could have been other places, but that was the only place that they were really aware of in the former Soviet Union. So we went as missionaries there, and in the end, the Lord helped us, and we began a seminary for the former Soviet Union. We did not know that was going to happen. It was all actually very miraculous what the Lord did. But
Mhm.
in that culture, or in all of the former Soviet cultures, the situation or the society is about half the people are Russian and Russian speaking, and about half or whatever their nation is. For Estonia, it's Estonian. For Latvia, Latvians, Lithuanians, Polish. And the reason for that is because of how the communists did when they, back from the 1940s all the way up until 90, this is 1990, they tried to destroy culture. That was one of their goals. And so not just Christians and not just churches, but many churches were destroyed. They literally shipped in poor Russians to work as slaves on train cars into all those Soviet republics that when we were growing up, it was just called the Soviet Union in school. We
Mhm.
didn't understand all the different names because they were just considered Russia. But they before occupation had been, of course, their own cultures. Anyway, then unfortunately, what the communists did is that many of, especially the men, were shipped away to Siberia and killed. But the purpose of that was to mix up the cultures. And a big purpose was so that they couldn't even speak to one another, literally, because they're different languages.
Yeah.
So they had to work side by side in a factory with a gun held at their head all the time. But they really didn't even know each other's names and could not communicate.
Mm.
So we found ourselves in that culture just thrown in when we were saying, Jesus, we're just available, we're willing to go. And I promise this, I'm going to make a point because this really ties into what we're doing now
You're good.
and have done for 25 years. And that is that we had to use simultaneous translation equipment because,
Mhm.
again, people couldn't understand each other. So let's say, Ben, I'm looking at our screen. You are lighter skinned, probably, and lighter hair than me. So you look sort of more Scandinavian, more
Mhm.
Estonian. I'm dark skinned, dark hair, so I look very Russian. My husband is more like you, so we looked like a different kind of couple.
Mhm.
But we used translation equipment, and but God somehow made it work because that's all we had. Otherwise, we couldn't communicate. The point is that actually helped to birth the ministry that we did then birth, called International Leadership Institute, because we saw that if you could, that leadership is really the key. If you could train someone in their own mother tongue how to do anything, it would maybe bake a cake, how to change a tire.
Yeah.
For us, it was church planting, missions, evangelism. If it could be in their own language and culture that they could understand, they can get to their people faster and multiply it out.
Yeah.
So that actually is what happened. We didn't have a name in the beginning, but we were blessed to be the founders and are blessed, I guess, to be the founders of International Leadership Institute. And so for the last 25, 26 years, we were involved there and so thankful for what the Lord did. But a real burden in my heart has always, I actually always been from the time I was 13, when it was a real calling on my heart, are the unreached
Mm.
places of the world, people that have never even been able to have the opportunity to hear the gospel. So we turned over ILI as far as being in leadership position there, and I was able to form a nonprofit called a 501(c)(3) called Operation Beautiful Feet, because the word
Mhm.
says, "How beautiful are the feet of those that bring the good news of the gospel of peace." And so it focuses on evangelism and the unreached, as well as some compassion ministries. So that was a long introduction, but that's some background and sort of who I am.
Well, and I appreciate the background because it really does tie into what we're going to talk about today with cultural intelligence. But Joy and I know each other through, well, I first met Joy in 2023 in Houston at the
I'm sorry, I didn't,
Woodlands.
I left that part out. Yes, keep talking.
Yeah,
You
no,
tell
go
me.
right ahead.
No, you go.
We met at the Woodlands at
Yes.
a missions conference in April of 2023. She and her husband did a session on the International Leadership Institute for primarily global Methodists that were coming together for this missions conference. So there were some other people in different denominations represented there. And International Leadership Institute, of course, works with many different organizations, not just the Global Methodist Church, but um, that's where we first met, and then we got to spend time together in Costa Rica as
Yeah.
delegates to General Conference. And then this past summer in Tennessee, when Joy joined our annual conference to speak for our missions night. And I'm just tremendously blessed to get to continue to know Joy and to be a coworker for the kingdom and leading alongside her in so many ways. So, and we'll be in South Africa together next year for a
Yay.
conference as well. So um, it intrigues me, Joy, because the listeners have heard me share that I lived overseas in the Czech Republic as a missionary for 8 years and then worked for an additional 4 years after that, from 2018 to 2022, cross culturally based here in America, but working with missionaries around the world. Um, and the amount of culture that one has to consider when you're doing any kind of work, whether it's ministry in the church, whether it's in secular organizations, or even in families that are in
Right.
different parts of the world or in different walks of life as far as their work because being a missionary you are in a culture of missionaries but you're also living in a third culture when you're serving on the field but you have your mother culture that you've come from and so navigating all of those different cultures um, is tricky at times.
Yes.
So, well, before we get into that, cultural intelligence for those that are listening is not, I always describe it as not being culturally sensitive in the sense that you are tiptoeing around culture. It is being culturally sensitive in that you are engaging the culture that you are in and you're aware that you are in a different culture when you engage people in different countries, different walks of life. You could be in a different culture when you're in your office and then when you're at home. And so that constant awareness and intelligence of understanding that people bring with them culture to the way they communicate, the way they lead, the way they engage with people, the way they do ministry, the way they understand God and the world around them. And so, before we get into it, how would you, with all of your bags of experience, Joy, how would you define cultural intelligence?
Wow, you just defined it really well, Ben. I believe everything you said was absolutely accurate and also just, I believe, imperative, just necessary.
Yeah.
But cultural intelligence is, for me, as you mentioned, the ability to understand, to adapt to be effective in your work in different cultural settings, diverse, whether it be, as you said, even at home, at work. uh, in our society in different places, north and south. There's just differences there, as well as cross-culturally, and even going maybe beyond awareness, but having that knowledge that you need, so that then I believe cultural intelligence then uh, leads to, or we must have that in order to be culturally relevant as we're trying to even teach, talk, share, witness, evangelize with others.
Yeah. And so going back to what you were saying about your work in Estonia and in the former
Mhm.
Soviet Union, um, when I worked in the Czech Republic, of course, it was after the split between the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic, but before they were one country, Czechoslovakia. And
Yes.
I remember learning that it was created as a country to be a buffer between Germany and Austria after World War One, and they were just put together. There was no consideration for language, there was no consideration for tradition, that someone just, well, we know who the someone was. It was Woodrow Wilson. And the Allied forces drew a line on a map and said, this is a new country. And
Mm.
so I want to get your take on how you experience similar um, clashes, similar
Yeah.
dissonance between cultures as the Soviet Union just gathered people together, but then tried to
Right.
keep them apart by language and things like that.
Yes, yes. Oh, and you having lived there can relate. I learned so much as an outsider, as an American, that of course we don't learn in our history books,
Mhm.
and that people here really can't, other parts of the world couldn't know. Of course, under occupation with the communists, cameras and other people were not allowed in.
Mhm.
So it was fascinating to me, but also I'm so thankful for my relationships. Again, that cultural intelligence is building relationships with people to understand their culture, just to observe, to watch how they interact with each other. The Yes, there's words that they call like this, we call an ink pen. They would call it something different, but
Yeah.
just to see how those things happen. But as you were speaking, um, seeing, especially when outsiders, as you said, Wilson or whoever, drew the line there, very similar for most of those Soviet countries because the communists determined at the time or felt that they controlled the people's lives. That was their goal, actually, the power that was there. So to mix up all those cultures, uh, it makes things so complicated to understand. For example, for me, when we just arrived in Estonia, I had two babies. Caleb was almost one and Hannah was almost three. So there is just learning language themselves as far as language goes.
Yeah.
But I needed to go to the market to try to find bread in one place and sugar in another place and potatoes in another place. It's not like going to a Kroger or a Publix or whatever, Walmart, whatever the
Yeah.
grocery stores are here. And and I learned that sometimes I could tell by dress, but other times by language when I began to learn both the languages, if they were Russian or Estonian, who I was even talking to, and then how to
Mhm.
say, how much does this cost in their language, or to ask some questions. But it takes so much observation and listening to see, and I'm sure you experienced this too as an American, Ben,
Mhm.
like the horror, the things that happened to them and in front of them during occupation kind of times, which would be true for all of us, just in our life experience, our history, even if it
Yeah,
wasn't a horrible thing, because
absolutely.
that helps determine some of it's trauma, a lot of it's trauma. And people, and so, for example, I mean, I hope I'm not jumping off
No,
the
go
subject,
right
but
ahead.
if you're looking at the people and in the now this is Estonia, it's not Czech, I understand, but the Estonian culture, the people look very staid is a word I use, like not smiling,
Yep.
not huggy, not
Yep.
relational in that way. Now, after you've heard their stories of what they have been through, you completely understand. I completely understand that. And I just love them for who they are compared to the Russians who are lovey, huggy, talk, talk, talk like us as Americans, most
Mhm.
Americans, very extroverted in general, just a totally different. culture and upbringing kind of so I could go on and on,
I,
but it's very interesting, but also hugely important for any leader, no matter what, whether it's Christian in the Christian world or even in business, whatever, to understand where the people have been or who they are, because it all determines how they think and the way that they respond and react, for us to know how to even talk to or minister to, relate to.
and you used the perfect word, Joy, relate. My area of expertise and things we've talked about on this podcast before is transformational leadership. And it's
Uh,
all about building relationships. And I think cultural intelligence allows you to have the foundation to build those relationships instead of just going in and changing things or going in and
right.
thinking that everyone is going to be one to your personality because you're, like you said, your Americans are more outgoing, and the people in Estonia, like the people in the Czech Republic, were very stoic
Hmm.
and distant. But it's not a bad thing,
Right.
because
Right.
once you get to know them, you understand where they're coming from, and once they got to know me, just I'm sure as they got to know you, then
Yes.
they understand we're not just crazy Americans who will just befriend anybody.
That's right.
Um, and so it's about that relationship, and that's where lives are transformed. But it begins by understanding that cultural component. So I wonder, Joy, with your experience in international leadership, how have you experienced leadership that has gone well and leadership that has gone poorly
Hmm.
that hinged on the understanding of cultural intelligence?
Oh, that's a great and a question. I can talk a long time on that, but I'll
Go
try
right
not to.
ahead.
Let me go negative first. Negative
Okay.
first. Um, the things I've seen just fall apart that are just horrific to me, is to see someone go in. And now again, most of my experience, has been in the Christian world, and when even when I was living overseas, or when I'm going on short-term kind of trips for ministry. So that's kind of my context, more so than maybe in just in one country, in one place. But first, it's so critical I always, if I'm going in somewhere, but that's because I've learned this, and I had great teachers even before I went overseas, trying to say, how do I be the best missionary possible? I want to be the witness for Jesus, but I don't want to offend anyone. So always trying to do research. Sometimes it's just Googling, and an encyclopedia used to be, now just Google, to try to find out culture and history of a place or of a person if possible. But what are the taboos? What are things that an outsider, not just an American, but any outsider, even if it's the country that lives next to that's next to that country or person, or state even, what are taboos? What are things that would just be so offensive that I don't want to be? I want them to know that I'm there to learn and not to come in and say, this is how it's done. Um, so the negatives that I've seen are outside. Again, I'm not saying American, outside anywhere, outside coming in, acting so arrogant and like I know everything and you
Mhm.
know nothing, and I'm the important one, the educated one, and you're not, and I'm going to teach you. I'm going to show you. I never say that, Ben. I've tried so hard to ask the Lord to help me to never.
Yes.
I think it's been in my brain for so long that I'm pretty sure I don't. I don't know of a time that I've said that I want to come in and show you how to do something, or a better way. Usually people, after you've got the intelligence and you're relevant with them and they know you love them and vice versa, and they can trust you, will listen to a different idea. That doesn't mean it changes, but maybe will listen to something, or they want to learn from you. But if you come in with that high-handedness that I am better than, and it's just because I either have money or I have formal education or I'm from this country, and you know nothing. That's what I see. Or I see even some churches, which is embarrassing, but ministries come into different places, countries, and say, this is how we do it where we are, and we're going to make a little clone of what we do. It should not be American. It shouldn't be British, whatever is the outsider. It should be for their culture. So
Yes.
that's the negative that I've seen, that people, even if they are intelligent, maybe they've watched and seen how the people behave, they think they need to change that. That's so, I believe, sinful and wrong.
Yeah.
So that's a negative. Yeah. Trying to duplicate what they do somewhere else or whatever, because
Yeah.
everybody's unique and different. The positives, though, oh my goodness, there are so many. And I'll stop and then let's see if you want to ask a different kind of question for me to explain
Yeah.
even some times that I've seen God even help me, little old me, just in the moment. It had to be a miracle for him to help me to know how to relate to somebody to try to be culturally relevant. Because if you do are willing to go in and be with the people wherever that is and follow their cultural norms, that doesn't mean do something sinful. But for example, I'm thinking about far out in the Maasai tribe in Africa.
Yeah.
For example, cows are everything to them. Their cattle is everything.
Mhm.
And so they live because of those cows. So they stick a knife in the vein, the neck of the cow. It's not going to kill the cow. It's to let the blood come out and they drink the blood. That's their protein. I mean, it's just that, and again, it'll go back up. It's not going to kill the cow.
Yeah.
So to watch me drink the blood, they're staring and they're wanting to see if I will do what they do. And when I do, they cheer. If I'm willing to eat and drink what they do, then they're willing to listen to me because they'll say, she's one of us.
Yeah.
Even if I'm having to eat rat or bugs or goat guts, nasty stuff. And, as I do it, maggots. I've eaten maggots before, Ben. I've asked the Lord as I'm swallowing it to please not let me vomit in front of other people. Like don't let me throw it up. It matters to them, but I try not to think about just what it's doing to my body. But if you're willing to do that and be one as much as you can with the dress sometimes, just or trying to learn some language, just a word or two. They love to laugh because we probably butcher a word, but the fact that we care enough to not just say, I must use a translator. You must learn to speak English. That's not the way to go. It's to try to teach in their own. So I don't know if that answered that correctly or not, but
It,
I can,
I don't think there's a correct answer, Joy, and
yeah.
I so appreciate what you're saying because I think anybody that's listening that's lived overseas or lived cross-culturally or even worked with people that are cross-cultural in their nature um, can appreciate everything you said. It made me think, and I'm going to share something. And I know that we're global Methodists, and there are going to be people listening that might disapprove, but it's culture. When I lived in the Czech Republic, I remember the first days I was there, I called the mission sending agency I was with and asked what our policy was on drinking beer
Ah, yeah, yeah.
because for a Czech person, the Maasai, their important thing is the cattle. Well, Czechs take pride in their beer brewing, and
Mhm.
they are known worldwide for the quality of their beer. And when a Czech person invites you into their home or invites you to go out to a pub or to a dinner,
Mhm.
there's always going to be beer involved.
Yes.
And if someone rejects even to try the beer, it automatically closes them off to any further conversation with that Czech
Right,
person because you've rejected their culture.
right.
And it's not about going out and becoming intoxicated.
Exactly.
It's
Yes.
it's about appreciating the quality of their work and the national pride, the culture that they have built around being the world's best brewers. And
Yes.
so the mission sending agency wrote me back and said, well, as long as you're not, getting intoxicated, if it's a cultural thing, then we would encourage you to do that. So like you, there were times I had to pray, dear Lord, let me be able to drink this because I know it's not tasty to me.
Right.
And but I still have so many Czech friends
Hmm.
to this day because I was willing to take that step and, like you said, become one of them. And they would tell me, you know, Americans, you have these low outer walls. Everyone is your friend. And then you have high outer walls because you don't really open up to people except for maybe one person, and it takes a long time for you to let that one person over that high wall. Czechs have really high outer walls. That's that stoic,
Yes.
nature. But when I was willing to become part of them and ask the questions and participate in culture and learn about their history and who they were as a
Right.
people, then I'll never forget. It took 2 years, and one of my Czech friends finally looked at me and he said, "We're friends now."
Yeah.
And I said,
Praise Jesus.
"Now?" And
Yes.
and he said, "Yes, now." And
Mhm.
and I said, "I thought we were friends for the last 2 years." He goes, "Well, for you Americans, we were friends then.
Right.
But for
Right.
me, we're friends now. You're
I love
inside the high wall." And he said, he told me once you're in the high wall, the wall around a Czech's heart is very low. So once they let you in, you're in for good.
good. Yeah, absolutely. Good.
So I don't know if any of that resonates with you, Joy.
Completely. Absolutely. And you're not even aware of it when that's happening, but it takes a
No,
very long time. They tell you afterwards, like, yeah, what it was like before.
exactly. And there's no like checklist for cultural
Right.
intelligence, like I
That's
must do this.
that's
It,
right.
it's a natural thing. Like you said, you're not even aware of it happening.
Yes, yes. But Ben, I think if we go in, of course, as Christians, and we want a global Methodist, we're so excited about the new denomination and where we are and where we're going. Um, I think a real just key, and this would be true for cultural intelligence, it's true for everything. It's just
Hmm.
Jesus. And that
Yeah,
is Philippians 2, to have the mind of Jesus and to
that's right.
ask the Holy Spirit, because we as Wesleyans believe that God can entirely sanctify our hearts so that our hearts we think the way that God does. And we're never God. I don't mean that kind of
No.
perfection. If we're clean of ambition and of selfishness and ego and saying, Jesus, fill me with you so that I react and respond, with your love, joy, peace, all the gifts of the fruit of the Spirit, um, God's going to honor that. And the big part of that is having the mind of Jesus and being a servant mentality, like Philippians 2, that other people are more important and that we are just wanting to serve them like Jesus did. He was
Yeah,
first but came last. And it was a cross and not a crown for the
that's right.
kingdom, And I think if we go in with that, God honors our hearts. I know I've made mistakes. I'm sure you did too.
Oh, yes.
Your intentions are so good, but you're just trying to listen and sometimes agree with something you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have. Or even our habits, like a literal habit, like in our country, I think is true. It may be in other places too, but when we're saying okay to someone, a lot of times we do the okay symbol, like
Yep.
or a thumbs up, kind of thing, like, oh yeah, that means you did good. Okay, I'm with you, that kind of thing. We understand that, but there are some cultures that if you do that, that's like giving them a finger. It is, I
Hmm.
mean, literally, it is so offensive.
Yep.
Or to shake hands, like we a lot of times to make a deal or to say I agree with you or hello, a greeting is shaking hand. But there are places in the world that they literally use that hand to wipe themselves when
Yes.
they've gone to the restaurant, to the toilet out in the bushes. And
Yeah.
so to touch that hand is they're defiled or they feel that they are. So sometimes if you don't know that ahead of time, you don't mean to, but you offend, but you apologize and move on and try to learn more so that you don't in the future.
Absolutely. And you've just pointed out that culture is so much more than just traditions and
Yeah.
and even the way that they interact day to day, but it's the small nonverbal
Yes, yes.
gestures.
Body language. Yes.
Exactly. Like I think, you were talking about the thumbs up. I think of the quintessential picture of Richard Nixon doing this on a
Yes.
plane in a
Yes.
country where that was like giving the finger.
Yes. Yeah.
And the big
Yeah.
faux pas that even the president of the United States at the time had made culturally.
Right. Right. And he didn't know or mean to, of course.
Exactly. He just,
Yeah.
that was, I mean, he always did that,
But
but
that's true in our country, Ben. I was thinking, I might be off. I hope I'm not
no,
getting
you're
totally
going
off.
right where I want to go. So,
Okay, so when Wes and I got married, again, I'm a country girl, and I'm very thankful for my upbringing because I really believe that being on the dairy farm in the dirt, in cow manure, and working hard, knowing how to do that is why I really can go and sleep in a cow manure hut in Africa or in the jungle on the ground in South
mhm,
America. I'm thankful for that. I married a city boy. We met at Asbury Seminary, which I'm very thankful, but I married a city boy. And I joke and say, I don't know if he'd ever even seen a cow before he met me. Now, I think he had probably, but he certainly did not and probably still doesn't know how to milk a cow, you know? Oh, that's another thing. It's interesting. Now I'll come back to that,
Go
but
ahead.
in Africa, uh, just 2 or 3 years ago, I was ministering to a group of widows, precious widows. They said, "Joy, the widows are waiting for you." And
Mm,
in this particular culture, if the husband has died, the woman is nothing.
oh,
The just the society thinks, well, she's not the worker. She wasn't the breadwinner, we would call it, the person that brings in the money. So it's very sad. They will
mm,
not give her a job. They will not rent her, even if she had a little bit of money, which she doesn't, but any kind of money to rent to her. Her children cannot go to school because in the African culture, it's so different again from ours. Our system is that you pay to go to a private school, but a public school in America is free. I know we end up paying some things, but it's supposed to be free. They're all education, public, the most public. You have to pay school fees and you also have to wear a uniform. And
mm,
that's why there's so little education or so few are educated because they don't have the resources. But in this case with the widows, the big issue is that they have nothing and they literally are just in rags and trying to live off maybe some relative, anyone to give them a place to even sleep on their floor. The point of all that is a pastor was really very wise. He taught school. Most people there are bivocational, but he tried to gather the widows together. He didn't know what to do himself. And so some were older, some were younger, and tried to help them become like a group to save their little shillings, their money together and try to help one another. And so it took some years. It actually took them 2.5 years to raise enough money that when they first gathered, I was not even going to tell this story, but this is actually a fun story. It's a sweet Jesus miracle. But they put their money together that very first day, 15 women, and it was 60 Kenya shillings. Today, that would be about 32 American cents. 32
oh,
cents is what they all had together. They were so unselfish and decided that if they could put their money together, they could maybe get a chicken that if each one of them got one chicken, that could help them have eggs for their family and maybe it would multiply. But rather than waiting until they had $5 American so that one would have chicken, they waited till they had enough money for each one to have. And it took them 2.5 years meeting to get enough for one chicken. So unselfish, such sweet stewards. Then, and they were good stewards, then their big dream was a goat. And
mm,
that'd be about 50 American dollars each. But again, they waited and it took them 5 years to save enough, work enough, trying to from their chicken and their eggs to have a goat. By the time that I met with them, I shared with them about some widows I knew about, like a Susanna Wesley and an Elizabeth Elliot, and then just biblically trying just to encourage them and say I'd be praying. And I just said, "How do I pray for you?" And their big dream was a cow because in their culture, not he, even again, the cows are more expensive there in that situation than they are here in the States. But if they had one cow, they would share her because that would mean you're wealthy, but that would provide milk for their family. So
mm,
one woman would have the let the cow graze at either her, she probably didn't have land, but if she could give it a neighbor, somebody let her use their grass for one week. That meant they would get the cow about once every 4 months, 1 week out of 4 months to maybe have a cow. Anyway, that was their big dream. And so the Lord in the end has provided. I put some stuff on my Facebook and just said, please pray for these women. They're just so precious. This is their
mhm,
dream. And some Americans actually saw that and said, you know what? We have so much money. Our grandchildren don't need anything for Christmas. We want to buy a cow for a widow. Let them understand how that helpful that would be. And it did transform society. But my whole point of trying to say that was, I said to them, well, the next time I come, I'm going to pray there's a cow here and that I can milk the cow with you. And they just laughed and laughed after the translator kicked in and said what it was. They said, that's not possible because this is so true in their culture. They could not imagine that a Mzungu, Ben, you and I are a Mzungu. That means a white person in the Swahili language. A Mzungu cannot milk. They can't imagine that I would know how to milk a cow. So, it's just some things like that. But I
yeah.
did go back and showed them how to milk a cow, and they just thought it was the greatest thing in the world because they didn't think that anyone on the outside could milk a cow. Anyway, that's totally different culture. Now, my point that I was bringing to you or trying to was that about Wes when we got married. So he had already graduated 1 year ahead of me, and it was in his our first little appointment in the place called Walnut Grove. Isn't that sweet? But it's in
I love
Georgia. But
it.
Walnut Grove is sort of like little house on the prairie.
That's right.
Anyway, Walnut Grove. What Walnut Grove actually was a crossroads. Really, literally a crossroads, and most of the people were stopping to buy their liquor to go to the Georgia games, Ben, in Athens, Georgia, because that's where the University of Georgia plays. And so
Mm,
Walnut Grove's just a crossroads, and on each corner, three of the four corners, one was a gas station, were liquor stores. And
mm,
that really was true. That's where people stopped to get the liquor to go to the game. Anyway, Lord gave us great ministry there, but it was rural community. And here was the way that I was actually able to help Wes so much. Wes did not grow up in the church the way that I did. And again, I grew up in a very rural setting.
mhm.
So he was taken to church maybe by his grandparents when they met together, but it wasn't normal for their family. So he didn't become a believer until he was 15, and it was because someone invited him to come to youth group from school. And so he said, I need you to help me, in ministry. So I would go with him on all visitation. That was important culturally to go to the homes of the people just to visit. And I could help carry the conversations because I'm the country girl and I know about their cows and goats that are out there and how to slop the hogs. Wes didn't know those things because he's a city boy, but he learned. He learned even from me. But we were a good team, to try to help to minister there. So that's small, but it really, I mean, tell you, it mattered in that community. Not that they loved me more than Wes, not that at all, but that helped him and us to be able to minister to the people there. Whereas if we had been in a big city setting, I'm the one that would have needed to observe more and listen to him to try to understand, the busyness and the craziness of a city. So,
Well, and that's a perfect transition because I'm sure people that are listening think, well, cultural intelligence, that's for people that work overseas or work in different
oh,
countries or cultures, and you're explaining exactly what it is. It's
yeah,
it is that, but it's also understanding that in our own backyard there are different cultures. And I think about, so you and I have that same common thing of going to Asbury for our MDivs,
yes.
and I served a little church here in the area for 2 years while I was at the seminary. And here I was coming from the seminary to this wonderful group of people in this small church, very rural. Um, and uh, I thought, okay, God, I'm coming from the seminary. I don't want them to see me as like, oh, he's coming to tell us, what we're doing wrong, or to be this, pull
Right.
out the Greek because I'm in Greek class and things like that. Because I grew up in a small church in Indiana where we always knew what the pastor was studying at seminary because that's the kind of pastors we had. And they would
Yes.
pull out the Greek when they were in Greek
Me
class, and
too.
they this and
Yes.
that. And the other. And so you knew what they were studying, and it was almost hilarious. You could guess their schedule, but I wanted to be I wanted to be relational. And I thought, please give me a sign, God, of some way that I can connect with these people who, even though we live in the same county, there's a different culture. And when I walked in the church, the hymnal that they had tucked in the pews was not the United Methodist hymnal. It was a red bound hymnal, and it had a cross on the front, and the words on it say "Our hymns of praise," and that's the hymnal that I grew up on in my little church in Indiana. And so we
Right.
immediately had a connection when I said, "Oh, I know this hymnal,"
Yeah.
and could say, "Well,
Yes.
this hymn is on this
Yes.
page, and this and that and the other," and
Yes.
no
That
one
got you
else
on
had
their
ever.
side. They loved you after that.
Exactly. I was in
You were
because
one of
I
them.
understood them, and
Yes.
I spent time with them, but it was that immediate connection. So you sharing that, I would love to hear just your insights on how people in the church, people in their homes here in the United States, where we find ourselves today, Joy,
Hmm.
how they can better understand cultural intelligence, not as a mindset that you have to have when you cross into a different geographic culture,
Right.
but when
Yeah.
you cross the street.
Oh, and it's critical. One thing you mentioned about Greek there, I think it's so critical for us if we're trying to witness to someone or just build relationships with them here in the state, just, I mean, again, at the grocery store or your neighbor or where your kids go to school or, whatever.
Hmm.
Um, so important to be sensitive to try to find out about the other people. One thing that Dr. Dennis Kinlaw was brilliant at. Now, he was a brilliant scholar, and those of us that are listening or seeing this, if they were kind of in the Wesleyan world, probably know his name, but he was a brilliant, brilliant man that
Yes.
studied different languages like you're talking about, not just Greek, but Mesopotamian. I'm talking languages that are the world maybe thinks is dead now.
Yep.
But he was a Hebrew scholar, but he was so precious. He could talk to the big kings and presidents and the most educated people on the planet, but he also could talk to somebody simple like me. And it is because he never got away from what Jesus did in his heart when he was 13 years old. Because he really surrendered everything to the Lord then. He was gloriously sanctified. And that's a word that we need to be careful to use. Was just gonna say, but he was very humble. He was a
Yes.
man, a Philippians 2 man. And if you ever sat down to talk to him, you wanted to go pick his brain because you want to hear stories from 50 years ago and or about the Asbury revival in 1970 that he was the president of the college at the time. All those things. He would never focus on himself. He was brilliant in this regard. He
Hmm.
turned the question immediately. He wouldn't even answer. He'd say, "Well, oh, okay, but tell me about you. Tell me about your family. How are your children? Uh, he, it was about the other person. He was humble in that. And that was brilliant and wise to know how to minister to folks. And that's what we need to do to be very sensitive to people, not coming in with high-handedness and with big words. This isn't about overseas, it's about here. We should never come in talking to somebody like about the word righteousness. A lot of people don't know what that means. Propitiation,
Yep.
eschatology, Christology, things that sometimes, if we have been not to seminary, but just if we've been interested even, we might spit that out with some theological jargon when we're talking to seminary friends, but not to regular people like you and me, not
Exactly.
just at Christmas time, like we've just celebrated with a family, because people don't understand what that means. Plus, it actually, to me, I think puts up a wall because they think they're so smart, I can't even talk to them. And we're
Hmm.
not smart. We're not. We just want to be careful. Even again, the word like righteousness is in the scripture. Sanctification is. It's glorious. I'm so thankful for what God's done in my heart. But
Yes.
it's important for me to be able to explain it in a simple way that everybody, could understand. So I think another thing is, Ben, I think trying to find a point of contact. If we are wanting to kind of evangelize, or we know somebody's not a believer, I'm not talking about just inviting them to church, but just talking about Jesus, is finding something we have in common. Like
Hmm.
maybe we're at the ball field together because our children are playing sports. Maybe we've taken our aging parents to the doctor. We're sort of sandwiched in. We've got aging parents and trying to deal with that and find maybe even a memory care place, or we're struggling, like to share those kind of things in common. Or it could be sports, it could be art, it could be music, things that we're, interested in. To build relationship first, to then even be able to talk, whether it's about ministry and evangelism or anything in life. It's important to be culturally relevant, but have that intelligence ahead of time. I'm sorry. I don't know if
No,
that
absolutely.
or not.
I,
Yeah.
I was just gonna tack on to that this podcast is all about living and leading outside of the box. So
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say all this, and I want you to express to the listeners, how is having cultural intelligence an aspect of living and leading outside the box?
Oh, well, I think it's crucial and critical. And I think that's what makes a really strong leader because leadership is influence. If you influence folks if they're respecting you, but you've got to earn that respect.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean you're trying to necessarily, you're just building a relationship, but then that's how that reflects, just as you were saying with the folks in Czech after a couple of years. Hey, you're inside now. You're a real friend.
Yep.
And that's true. That's true in any relationship. But that is, Ben, I think that is the outside the box uh, thing because a point. because that's not how the world views success or views what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be stepping over everybody else's ambition, climbing the ladder, and it doesn't matter what you do to the other people. It's not about relationship, it's about money or about status, a job, a position, getting a promotion, whatever. And that is so opposite of Jesus. Again, it flip-flops. Jesus does what the world's standards are. And that's what I think being outside the box is, that we're totally different. This was a real compliment to me. This sounds so silly, but when we moved back to the States from Estonia, a friend of mine that I had grown up with, I mean, I knew, but I'd not seen him in years. We were not in the same school, but we knew each other. And he said, "I'm just telling you the truth, Joy. When I saw you," he said, "we saw each other passed in the hallway at the nursery at the church."
Mhm.
And he said, when I said, "Well, what have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm a missionary." He later, sort of like your friend in the Czech Republic, said later, he said, "When I heard you say that, I thought, she's gone to Mars and back. Like, what is that?" Although he loves me now and understands now and all that, but it was just what he was not expecting at all. He was expecting me to be a bit, there's nothing wrong with being a business person, but in a different situation.
Yeah,
But maybe a lot of times when we're sharing with people, they do think we're from another planet until we have that relationship.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. You are depicting living outside the box perfectly, that it is not what the world expects. And it's not what the world expects, in business. Like you said, the world expects money and achievement. In the church, the world might expect a pastor to grow a church into a mega church
Right,
and build their own little kingdom, so to speak.
right, right.
But leading and living outside the box in both of those means that you surrender all of the world's expectations
Yes,
to
yeah.
God's expectations, and that looks vastly different than
I
what
think
we
it's just
expect.
being faithful to the call that He's
Absolutely.
put on us, no matter what the
Absolutely.
world says or thinks. Yeah.
And
But
and it's
that's
a
the way we
challenge.
relate. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
Well, I just thought of something, but I don't, I'll tell it real quick, and I
Go
hope if
ahead.
there's time, I hope. Because I learned something in this, but I thought, um, okay, when I was in seminary, I'll share this real quick. This helped me call about cultural relevance or cultural intelligence. J.T. Seamans is a name that, again, some of the folks listening to this will know or have had as a professor like I did. I was so blessed to have in missions classes. And the first
Mhm.
time I ever went overseas was with him to India. And oh my goodness, it was life-changing. I'm so, so thankful. But I remember him telling in class a story about him and his wife Ruth, who were ministering in villages, and this was an unreached people group. So they knew nothing. They didn't know the name Jesus to begin with. So they had been going there for weeks and weeks, even months, trying to explain the Word of God to them. And they had begun at the time back in Genesis, come all the way through. Now they're to Jesus. They come to the place where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life."
Mm.
And the people in the village they couldn't translate it. There was just a problem. Even though Ruth and JT knew the language, they couldn't translate it. There was not a word for bread. Never seen bread. They don't have bread. And for us, we know that means that Jesus is saying, "I'm the staple of life." That
Yep.
bread is their staple. And they went home and just cried and cried. They laid in bed tonight at night saying, "What are we going to do? We've worked all this time and we can't make a breakthrough. We can't get through." And then the Holy Spirit really helped them.
Mm.
It said, one day they went back and said, "Jesus said, I am the sweet potato of life." Because sweet potatoes were the staple for that village. And their eyes got big and they completely understood it.
I love
So
it.
in class, in seminary, JT says to us as students, and he said, or he asked the question, "So did I change the gospel?" Of course, some people say, "Yeah, you can't do that because you're changing God's word." Like you took the word out and you changed bread to sweet potato. But the answer was no, no. I was trying to be relevant. I was trying to be. It took us a long time to be intelligent culturally enough to
Yes.
know how the people. So I actually use that. Ben, I hope I'll if I can tell could I tell one more quick story?
Absolutely.
I need to be finished. But okay, the calling for me, this is backing up, but how I use that or how God used that, it was just miraculous. And this has happened many times, but one that just stands out in my mind is that um, again, when I was 13 is when I really felt called. I
Yeah.
truly felt called from God. And so as I knelt as a little 13-year-old girl, the image that was in my mind was of the jungle, like the Amazon jungle.
Mm,
So before now, fast forward after I do grow, I just said, Jesus, I know that I'm just a kid and I've got school and I have parents and I have to grow up. But when I do get grown up, if there are people that still don't know about you, I would love to go tell them. I mean, it was a very real prayer in my heart as a little girl. So I did grow up. And then, yes, there are still people that have never heard about Jesus. But when I was about to marry Wes, it was getting close to the wedding. And I thought, I've got to just say this. And I hope it's not a deal breaker. But I said, I feel so called to the jungle. And he put his arm around me, kissed me, all this fun romantic stuff, and said, "Oh, honey, that's okay. You go right ahead to the jungle and I'll pray for you, but I'm not going to the jungle because we're very different." And but I have done that. Anyway, I was so thankful for the opportunity to go to the Amazon jungle and some other jungles too. But this one particular time, I was out in a little canoe. The people, again, this is where you're having to eat all kinds of terrible things, and it's
yeah.
just, I could tell the whole story, but I was in a little dugout canoe out in the Amazon trying to just pray by myself, just had a few minutes to be with Jesus before I was going to speak that night in the dark because there's no electricity,
I
so it's
love this
completely
story.
dark. Well, I don't want to take it too long, but
No, no, no. I love this story. Do tell
Oh,
it.
okay. I'm in a little canoe. There's a big, huge splash. I'm out in the middle of the river. It's very deep. So it was like, and I love to fish. I thought maybe it's like a huge fish, but I didn't see it jump. I just saw the splash. I couldn't see what was happening. I kept paddling. And then behind me, when I got the little log, the little canoe past, there was a huge eruption on the water, like literally coming up out of the water behind me. I couldn't see what was happening. It was just like a wall of water for me because I'm down in the water. But the people up on the bank could see, and they could see it was a huge anaconda. So they start screaming, "Boa, boa!" And what had happened is the snake, they're huge, Ben. I can't, our viewers, your listeners can't, it's hard to imagine that they can be 30 to 50 feet long. They swallow men like you. They're called cow killers. They swallow real cows, real men,
Oh,
real deer. Just, they're so huge. So what had happened is it saw the shadow of the little boat. It came up and tried to get me, but it missed me, and it was wallowing in itself, kind of behind. I couldn't see, but they could see. So they are freaking out. Everybody's in panic. I'm still paddling over to try to get to the bank, but I still don't really know what's going on. But the people are just, it's horrible for them because they know the stories of how the boa, or let's say a neighbor, their granddaddy, somebody goes down the river in one of those little canoes to trade bananas. There's no electricity, there are no cell phones, no generator. This is very primitive. So they go down to trade bananas, but they never come back because the boa got them, is the snake, what they call the
mm,
snake. They've heard those stories, but nobody dreamed that one was living there at their village, where the mamas at night, if they, some of them don't have clothes at all, but the ones that do, maybe take their children down when it's about to get dark, dusky, and strip them off to wash them. The water, that river is everything. That's their life for them.
mm.
So it was a somber kind of a night. Except now that was a day that morning, one of the men had killed a big jungle rat, and the people were thrilled because it was going to be a feast. There's a time just to tell you, as an outsider, I was not looking forward to the feast, but culturally, I'm going to be relevant and eat the crazy rat, even though it was horrible. I can't tell you how horrible it was, but I did it. Anyway, the next morning, praise God, the sun's out. It really is rainforest. It's just so thick, but the sun's out, so it doesn't seem as scary as it was the night before. And I was teaching on from Peter. I was going to be teaching on spiritual warfare and being on guard against the devil through prayer for our families, our friends, our churches, whatever. So, so I'm out in the book of Peter and I'm reading where the word says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour." And I
Yeah.
had a perfect story, Ben. I thought this is so good because I had never seen a real lion before until I had been in an African country some years before, and I saw this happen. A real lion was stalking a group of zebras. I had never seen a zebra before,
Wow.
but there's a group of zebras over in a field. and I learned this about a zebra. They're real scaredy cats, kind of like our deer. They're very skittish. So the deer was always, they were on guard. I mean, the zebras were on guard. They would nibble a little grass, but if they heard the wind just blow a tree or some limbs or any kind of movement, they're on guard. They're looking because they're predators. I mean, God's put that in them, I guess, to look. That lion, I watched this huge cat over here for maybe an hour. He was in sawgrass, like it was very camouflaged. It
Mm,
was hard to know that lion was there. And I was even trying to look through binoculars. I couldn't even see his whiskers moving. Like he's watching or she's watching the zebras. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I don't know where, from another field, walked one zebra over into that big zebra group. And it was like us being together, hugging each other, saying, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you. We're at annual conference. We're happy to see each
that's
other."
right.
Like it was like a reunion. They were doing zebra talk. And as soon as they were not paying attention, the lion pounced, killed, took down one of the zebras. There's blood and guts everywhere. And then other lions come and have a feast, but the zebra's dead. So that was going to be my illustration about the lion being the devil being like a roaring lion. And
Hmm.
I thought, oh my goodness, I've really seen this, so I can say it. So my translator's name was Carlos. And that whole week, we had just been like this. He was amazing. That's something to pray for. This is on the side, but please pray for translators, for people that don't know language, because if
Yeah,
you've got a good one, they're gold. If you've got somebody that's not saying what you're saying, you don't even get the message across. But anyway, that's a whole nother podcast,
that's
probably.
right.
Anyway, so he could almost finish my spent sentences in the spirit. God had just helped us. He was precious. And when I had my Bible read, the devil is like the roaring lion, he stopped and he didn't say anything. And I didn't even look at him. I whispered, I said, "Carlos, what's wrong?" He said, "I can't translate that." I said, "What?" He said, "Lion." I said, "Why?" He said, they don't have a word for lion. They've never seen a lion." I said, "Okay, say the devil is like a big cat, seeking whom he may devour." He stopped completely. He said, "I can't." Then I looked at him. I said, "Why?" He said, "They don't have a word for cat. They've never seen a cat. Don't know what a cat is. I can't translate cat." So, Ben, I was stuck. I was just panicking in my heart. You're saying, "Oh no, I'm in front of all these people. Jesus, what am I going to do?" And then I'm not this fast. This had to be the Lord, because I'm not quick enough. I said, "The devil is like the boa." Oh my good, because he's watching to see when the shadow comes up in the water, and he's going to come and bring his prey down and choke you to death and drown you and then eat you. And oh my goodness, the people loved it because they could understand that's what the devil tries
Mm,
to do, because the boa is like the devil to them.
yes,
So I know that through the Spirit, God helped me remember that sweet potato story from those years before with JT Siemens, to say that, to change it, to try to help them understand. And so that's an example of trying to be relevant culturally, but trying to understand have the intelligence of that. And
yeah,
so I didn't need to keep talking. That's a long story.
no.
But hey, could I tell
Well,
you though a praise about that crazy snake?
do
Not,
tell.
not just that but for the people to understand. So that was the important thing. But about noonish that day, that was early morning, by about noon, up that river, it's huge, wide, kind of like the Mississippi at the wide places, where I was. Deep and wide is the river. Here came all these chiefs from different villages down and up and down of the Ashanaka. This was the Ashanaka people group. Here came chiefs and their whole entourages, and they all had on different colors of war paint, like berries they've made, different their designs. And the chiefs were coming and said this. This is so glorious and precious to me. "The word has come down the river that God saved the missionary from the boa, and we want to hear about this God." Is
Ah,
that not glorious?
amen.
So we went village to village explaining to the people that Jesus is the living water. But it was because of that crazy snake and how God used it in that culture. So I will hush,
Yeah.
but just an example.
No, I'm so glad you told that story. I remember the first time I heard you tell that story, and it's such an amazing example of cultural relevance and being intelligent to the cultural perspectives of Scripture. It's not changing the gospel to make things understandable to
Right.
people. I think we use the word relevant in our culture in our North American culture far too liberally.
Yes,
And we think, we hear, well, we need to make things relevant, and it's not making them relevant when you're making them um, watered down so that no one's offended.
exactly. You're right. I
It's
agree.
making, when you say you're making something relevant, you're making it understandable to the culture that may not have an anchor point to that concept.
Yeah.
So our sense, and to those who are listening, leaders who are listening, relevance has nothing to do, and we've had a podcast on what relevance is. It has nothing to do with changing to meet the culture standard. It has everything to do with having the truth and making it something that is accessible to the cultural understanding. So,
Yes.
um, uh, Joy, this has been an absolute pleasure to spend this time with
Oh,
you.
it's my
And
my thrill.
I
Thank you.
am not going to put you on the spot, except maybe I am. I would love to have you back because I think there's so much about culture, especially when we look at the culture of churches. I would love to have you come back and maybe do a podcast down the road about the culture of church and the kingdom, and how we bridge those gaps as leaders in religious organizations and the church, and how that helps shape our understanding of the world around us. So, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, my
Oh,
friend.
I'd love to. I'm not an expert, but I'd love to. I'd love to. Thank
Absolutely.
thank you.
So,
It's
it's been a
such a
great joy.
privilege. Thank you.
Oh, it's been a great joy. So you have been part of this journey today on living outside the box. For those that want to click the like and subscribe button, do so, and visit our website at www.outsidetheboxconsulting.org for more information about how you can begin to lead and live outside the box.